the Social Democrats.
Taoiseach, over the weekend we learned that PwC have been appointed to carry out an independent review into the colossal scale of the spiralling costs of the National Children's Hospital. At the moment, the current estimate of the cost, though it appears to rise day after day, stands at more than €1.73 billion, almost 3 times the initial €650 million estimate and well over the initial timescale that was laid out. Taoiseach, well, it's of course true that the current crisis is unfolding under Minister Harris's watch. The fact was that you were the Minister for Health when the decisions were being taken and the initial information was being put into the public domain, information which now appears to have little grounding in reality. The spending extravaganza hasn't just suddenly appeared in recent months. It has its origins in the establishment of the process, including the site selection, a process that you as Minister for Health were a key player in. Prior to the contract being awarded, there was a delay, and there was a lot of speculation at the time that the delay was because there was a difficulty getting funding in place. Taoiseach, did the figures ever really stack up? Was that an issue that was raised with you by officials at that time? And I wonder if you might outline to us the extent of the scrutiny that you, as Minister for Health, gave the tendering process. What set of circumstances led you, as Minister for Health, to sign off the contracts, which now seem to have been really a work of fiction? Was the veracity of the cost projections and indeed the timescale not rigorously tested by you and your officials at the time? And if it was, how have we ended up in this predicament? Taoiseach, we all know that the health budget is finite and the cost overrun has already impacted on health services and it will continue to do so. What assurances do we have now, if any, that there will be no further increase in the estimated cost of building this hospital? And make no mistake, we accept we desperately need the new Children's Hospital, but you and Fine Gael, and you just did it earlier, laud yourselves as a party of prudent fiscal management, but yet again, here we're stuck with a project where it appears that a blank cheque has been written to those with the contract to develop the site, and there's absolutely nothing prudent about that. My questions are, as Minister for Health, what due diligence was undertaken by you and your officials at the time to rigorously test the veracity of the contract proposals, specifically in relation to cost? What immediate steps are being taken or have been taken to stop the overruns? And what is the updated figure as of today in relation to the cost? And what health projects are now in doubt because of the overrun?
Taoiseach.
Thanks very much, Deputy. Just for the record, that the site selection and decision to go for the site in St James's was made when I was Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport, and the tendering was done when I was Minister for Social Protection. The planning permission was done when I was Minister for Health, but I was a member of all those governments, and therefore I accept collective responsibility for those decisions, as should everyone who was around the table at those times. A decision was made very early on that the best way to pursue and ensure that this new hospital was built well was through the establishment of a National Paediatric Hospital Development Board. So a dedicated board was established to make this development happen, with its own board, its own chairman, its own accountability structure, and employees who had a huge amount of experience in delivering big projects like the Aviva Stadium, for example. The costs, when I was Minister for Health, were in the region of 600 million or so, but it was always likely to rise, not least because of construction inflation, and we were aware of that at the time. And of course, additional things had to be added along the way, including ICT equipment, sprinkler systems, and so on. So the cost was always likely to rise, but not by the amount which it has gone up by in the last couple of months, and that requires further inquiries. And the Department of Health is doing that at the moment, and I imagine the PAC and others will want to do the same. But when we discuss the cost of the Children's Hospital, let's not forget something. Let's not forget the value of what we're building. The main hospital at St James's, Satellite Centre in Blanchardstown, which will open this year, the Satellite Centre in Tala, which will open next year. Let's not forget the value of what we're building. And one thing struck me when I was watching the news on New Year's Day, and I saw those pictures that you see every New Year's Day of the kids who are the firstborn that year. And it occurred to me that those kids will be alive in the 22nd century. They'll be alive in 2100, maybe 2110. We're building this hospital not for one generation, but for 3, 4 and 5 generations. And let's not lose sight of the value of this development. Individual rooms for every child. The possibility of their parents being able to stay in the room with them. 5 MRI machines, 15 theatres. This has the potential to totally transform the quality of paediatric care in Ireland. And it is not just for 1 or 2 years. This is a project that's going to last 100 years or more.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Murphy.
Same building is being built now as was proposed, and indeed, you know, if you look at other countries where they're building hospitals, the costs are not of the order that we're looking at here. Just because it's going to be the most expensive hospital in the world doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be. I hope it's going to be one of the best. But the reality of it is that there's huge cost overruns. Would you have signed off on this Taoiseach when it was being signed off on if you knew it was going to be 3 times the cost that was projected at the time? I've asked you what other health facilities are going to be impacted by virtue of the fact that the capital budget is going to be hugely impacted by this. And Dr Fergal Hickey this morning on the radio was talking about the need for capital investment to deal with the overcrowding, for example. And we understand investment is needed for the like of Sláintecare. What is not going to be done? Can I ask you to answer the questions that I asked you? And what is the cost as of today in relation to the National Children's Hospital?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
The cost as of today is exactly what it was back in December. I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but it's about 1.4 billion with additional contingencies above that, particularly around construction inflation. But if there has been any change since the week before Christmas, I haven't been informed of it. It is what it was. It is what it was then. In terms of whether I would have signed off on it or not, it's impossible to answer a hypothetical question like that. You'd have to know what the alternatives were, what the costs of the alternatives were, and what the pros and cons of those were. And there were many cons in a greenfield site, in fact. In terms of capital projects, you'll know that we've added 250 beds to the acute hospital system last year. The service plan provides for another 140, 150 to be added this year. That will happen. That won't be affected by this. However, we will need to find an extra 100 million because of the overruns this year, and that will have to come out of capital budgets. So roughly 50 million will come from the capital budget of the Department of Health, and roughly 50 million will come from the capital budgets of every other government department. We're currently working out how that can be done, but bear in mind it's in the context of a capital budget of about 5 billion a year, so it's in the 1 or 2% territory. And we anticipate that will mostly be achieved by postponing or delaying projects by 2 months or 3 months rather than having to cancel any particular project. But that is yet to be worked out.
Thank you, Taoiseach, and that concludes